Hi, John Hess from Filmmaker, IQ.com. This is an addendum to the last video, this last just one thing, I guess just one more thing, where we talked about moving a frame ahead of the beat in order to make it feel more like it's in line with the beat. I want to address some of the comments I've made, and also some weird thing about YouTube that I didn't know that changes everything in a little way. So the first thing I want to talk about is the comments I've been getting saying that, well, this is not because of neurology, this is because light travels faster than sound. And that's true. For any given distance, the light information will get to the viewer, the observer, faster than sound. However, the neurology still matters and still sits on top of that. In fact, here's an article from the National Center of Biotechnology Information where they're talking about the perception of synchrony between the senses. And they actually state right here that the neural processing time also differs between the senses. It is typically slower for visual than it is for auditory stimuli, approximately 50 to 10 milliseconds respectively. So yes, our eyes do actually process things about 40 milliseconds slower than our auditory system. And this leads to what's called a horizon of simultaneity, which is about 10 to 15 meters from wherever you are. So if something's less than 10 to 15 meters, you will actually sense the sound earlier than you will sense the visual. But if it's beyond 10 to 15 meters, you will see it before you hear it. And if it's 10 to 15, it will happen simultaneously. And if you're wondering imagining what 10 to 15 meters looks like, it's about the length of a penalty box in football and a little more than a first down in freedom football. Now, I don't want you to think that the brain is some sort of Swiss watch, like it's a precise mechanism that can measure things in a microsecond, because it is not. Even though we're talking about a 40 millisecond delay between visual and auditory senses, it's not precisely 40, and it's not always 40, and sometimes it changes. But again, the brain knows that there is a difference in the senses, and so it basically makes it up. Your experience is just the brain guessing what reality is based on this information that's not necessarily 100% truthful or accurate. In fact, when we talk about the human visual system, there's a lot of things in your eyes that are not really there. Now, furthermore, there's a study from the International Telecommunications Union looking at basically how much out of sync can you be before it becomes detectable and becomes a problem. And what they found is that, I'm going to read it right here, subjective evaluation shows that detectability thresholds are about plus 45 milliseconds to minus 125 milliseconds, and acceptability thresholds are about plus 90 milliseconds to minus 185 milliseconds on the average. And a positive value indicates that sound is advanced with respect to vision. So what they're saying there is that you can be behind up to 125 milliseconds and still be not detectable as far as lip sync goes, but you can only be 45 milliseconds ahead. And we're talking about detectability. The threshold of acceptability is even higher. You can be 90 milliseconds ahead, but up to 185 milliseconds behind. I think a better way to show this is a graph in the very same paper of theirs. You can see this little graph here. Here's the zero. Here's exact synchronicity, right, between visual and sound. But you only have a little bit of room in the foreground, in the plus category, where the sound is ahead of the vision, and you have a considerably larger delay range back here, where sound is delayed with regards to vision. So somewhere in this undetectability plateau is what we're playing with when we're working with moving edits a frame or two ahead or behind the beat. And remember, a frame in 24 frames per second is about 42 milliseconds. Looking at this graph here, if the sound is ahead of the video by one frame, it would be detectable. But we can go almost 1, 2, maybe 2.5 frames behind before it starts getting noticeable. Now, this paper is in regards to lip sync, and there's a lot of weird variables that go on with lip sync. If you haven't looked up the McGurk effect, look up the McGurk effect, because it will change the way you think about how your vision works. We do not see with our eyes alone. In fact, our ears can inform what we see, which is the weirdest thing of all. But in regards to technical standards, we are a little bit more strict. In fact, in film, it is commonly said that you're allowed 22 milliseconds on the front and back end. And with television, they say 15 milliseconds ahead and 45 milliseconds behind. And now we get to the topic that really drove me to make this addendum, and that's YouTube. So when I was told this technique, starting out, YouTube was still very, very young. In fact, these are the days of like Lonely Girl 15. I mean, this is like webcam stuff. So YouTube wasn't that viable. And the person that told me this had worked in film and broadcast television, which I just mentioned. The standards are much more strict as far as synchronicity. So YouTube apparently adds a frame of latency to whatever you upload. And I did not know that. So when I judged the video, when I edit it, I judged it on my monitor, on my computer monitor. I have a Blackmagic Decklink card, and I can see it on my monitor. And that's how I judged the video. I uploaded it, and I said, well, it looks about the same. But then I downloaded it because people were still arguing about how YouTube adds a frame. I didn't believe them at first because, what do they know? I downloaded it, and my goodness, yes, indeed. So let's take a look. So now I'm going to compare several videos I downloaded from YouTube to the video I uploaded. And I found some very interesting things. First of all, I found that Premiere actually introduces its own latency when you're exporting an H.264 file. So here's the original cut. This little bluish looking marker is the original visual cut happens here. And this green marker is where the original audio cuts in at 33 milliseconds after the video cut. Now 33 milliseconds is a little bit less than a frame, but that means where our visual cut's a little less than a frame ahead of the beat, right? But then the H.264 file puts the audio an additional 13 milliseconds later, right? So we're already getting a 45 millisecond delay. That's a frame. So that's a full frame. That's what we expected, a frame before the beat, right? But then you look at YouTube, and YouTube, let me just get rid of this in and out. YouTube, this is the purple marker, is an additional 33 milliseconds behind the H.264 file, making the audio hit 80 milliseconds after the video. That's essentially 2 frames now. So my intention was to make the cut 1 frame ahead. Now it's 2 frames. And it gets worse. If you go to the lower quality YouTube upload, we're at 101 milliseconds behind. So that's like the 144p. If you're watching my videos 144p, don't watch them, just listen to them. Okay, that's really low quality. So in essence, what you watched was 1 frame off. And it was because of YouTube. And I tried to give you guys something that was right on the money, but YouTube screwed the pooch there. So those people that said, "Hey, I like that one. I like the cut with the right on the beat much better than I like the cut that's 2 frames behind the beat." You were actually liking the cut that was 1 frame ahead of the beat. In fact, the 1 frame ahead of the beat was 2 frames ahead of the beat. Now, if you like the 2 frames ahead of the beat, I think it just means that you prefer the earlier cut. That it felt better. So there it is. So let's redo this artistic demonstration, and this time I'm going to shift all the sound ahead 47 milliseconds to make up for YouTube's latencies. So first, let's watch the video with the cut 1 frame ahead of the beat. Okay, now let's watch the cut with the cuts exactly at the beat. And because someone asked in the comments, let's watch what the video looks like if we put the cut 1 frame after the beat. And just to go back to see what it looked like, let's watch that cut one more time, 1 frame before the beat. Yeah, so now that's rectified, I think it's going to be a little more obvious for people when they see the one on the beat that it's going to feel a little later. I think if you see the frame after the beat, it's going to be definitely a little more later. So what's the takeaway? Now, if you have something that you're editing that's really frame crucial and you're going to go to YouTube, like a music video or something that you just need to have that hit right on the correct frame, take the entire video, edit it as you normally would, and then when you do an export with the shift of the sound ahead 47 milliseconds. Now 47 milliseconds is what it is right now. When I just tested it right now, this is how much latency YouTube adds. Could be different tomorrow. Could be different in next week. It could be different when the temperature gets cooler. It could be different for whatever reason. But right now, it's 47 milliseconds ahead to make up for the YouTube difference. Now, if you don't want to be precise at 47 milliseconds, one frame of 24 will do it. I mean, you're not going to notice 10 milliseconds. And then when you go to export it, make sure you export it not with H.264, but use something like ProRes to upload to YouTube, because H.264 adds its own 13 millisecond latency. Now, if you don't need frame precision, if you're making like a talking head video like me, where like the last video I could drop it down to 12 frames per second and no one really noticed except one person, then, live with it. It's not that big a deal. But ultimately, I don't want you guys to think this is a prescriptive technique that you should always cut one frame ahead. Not always. Do the cut, try moving a frame ahead, see if you like it, and then play it back, go back a little further and play the whole segment through and see if that cut works with that one frame ahead. Maybe it doesn't work. Maybe you want it a little bit late. Maybe actually you want several frames ahead so you can cut on action and sync the action in the shot. Say like you have a drum hit and you want that hit to sync with the beat, not necessarily the cut. So there's a lot of things. Remember, we are editing for human beings. We are not editing for computers. We're editing for squishy, malleable brains that distort time and try to make sense of the world. So you don't necessarily need to be super precise, but little tiny nuances like a frame here, a frame there, they do add up and they do make things different. So that's all I have for this addendum to video. If you found this useful, insightful, click like and subscribe. Tell YouTube, hey, stop it with the latency, man. It's annoying. Check out our Patreon. You guys really help keep my lights on here in this place. And if you need merch, we got merch. We got you covered. You hear that? So all that's left for me to say is to go out there, rectify YouTube's audio latency issues, and make something great. I'm John Hess. I'll see you at filmmakeriq.com. Bye-bye.